All right, welcome back. In this video, I want to dive into the source files, the Sass files behind Bootstrap. We'll poke around, look at the different components, and talk about how you can pick and choose the pieces that you want. And then in the next video, we'll actually talk about customizing them. So if you go to the documentation, if you go to download, we've been working with, I just lost the page. We've been working with CDN so far. And in one of the first videos, I showed how you could download the compiled files, the source files that include every Bootstrap component, every JavaScript piece of code. But we can also download the source files. So this contains sort of like the raw materials for Bootstrap. And then it also contains the compiled materials at the end. But what we can do is go in and eventually customize those raw materials, or we can make our own sort of version, our own compiled version of Bootstrap that is lighter weight. If we only want the grid system and reboot and buttons, we could do that and leave everything else out. So go ahead and click download source. Okay, and I dragged the folder that I just downloaded into a new folder so that you don't have to do that, but this is where I'm going to be working in this video and show you the different files. So if we open it up, there's a lot here, but what we care about are the SCSS files in here. And what you can see is that there's a ton of these individual files. They all start with underscores, and they each correspond to a different component or piece of functionality in Bootstrap. So pagination, navbar, modal, but there's also utilities. There's this thing called variables we'll talk about. So I'm actually going to open up all of this in VS Code. Here we go. Go back to the SCSS folder and take a look at one of these, like alert. Now here's all the code for alert. It's actually not very much, but there's more than it appears because there's this loop here. So this makes an alert class for every color. So that's how we get alert primary, alert danger, alert warning. It's never explicitly written down. Anyway, that's beside the point. There's all these components here, and at the very bottom, there is one file that doesn't start, there's a couple, but one file we care about that doesn't start with the underscore, bootstrap.scss. And if we look at it, all it does is import all the other files. So it imports the, images and grid and tables and forms and buttons, drop downs, and it combines them all so that when we compile this one file, it actually compiles all of this into a single file. And that's how we get this CSS file, this one here. This contains everything. So we could compile it on our own, or we could compile our own custom version. So I'm going to show you that now. If I wanted to, I could take any two components or three pieces and compile it into my own mini Bootstrap. So let's try it now. Now, generally, it's best practice not to make your own files inside of the Bootstrap source. You usually want to leave this alone and make your own file here and have it interact with the files inside of the Bootstrap folder. And that's what I'm going to do in the next video. But for simplicity's sake right now, I'm going to just do it all in the same folder so that I don't have to reference a bunch of nested files. So close everything down except for SCSS. So I'm going to make a new file in this folder, and I will call this one myversion.scss. And inside of here, I'm just going to import a couple of different components. So let's say I want, tables, and I also want, what else would I want? Drop downs. Now, we're probably going to run into some issues because there are some dependencies where we're probably going to need these early pieces as well, like type for fonts. We'll need variables for colors. So I'm just going to put some of this in here just so we don't get any errors where potentially, if we don't define colors, like if we look at variables is where all of our colors are defined. Blue, indigo, primary, secondary, and something like drop down is going to depend on colors, right? Because we have different colored drop downs. So we'll see if we run into any issues, but let's say these are the pieces that I want. So I'm going to save this. On its own, this doesn't do anything. I have to compile this into its own CSS file. So that's where Koala comes in. So let's do that now. Open up Koala. And I'm going to add my folder in, and my file or my folder is called custom bootstrap. So I'm going to add that in. And it's actually now going to compile a whole bunch of things, which I kind of don't like that it automatically does that. So I'm going to say Don't compile that. The only one I want it to compile is my version.scss. And why don't I have it compile it? So I'm gonna change the output path to the custom Bootstrap folder. So outside of the Bootstrap folder that we're looking at, and I'm just gonna call it I don't know, custom version.css, and save. So now, if everything went well, we'll see if it did. I should have a folder here. I think I need to save to get it to compile again. There we go. Custom version.css. And if we take a look, if I expand this, this contains a lot of Bootstrap, but not all of it. It's only 759 lines. So we can see we have code for dropdown, for example. These are all the dropdown classes. We have things like dropdown toggle, dropdown left, or whatever it's called, drop up, drop left. We have things for tables. We have our typography, display 1 through 4, but we don't have things like, well, anything else. We don't have nav bars or navs. So if I went to go use this right now, which we totally can do, if I make a new file called index.html, or, well, it could be any HTML file. I'll call it index.html. Save it. Instead of doing the CDN, and I'm not going to worry about JavaScript, I'm just going to include a link to my file, which is called custom version.css. So the most annoying part about all of this stuff is figuring out your folder structure, your pipeline, where you're compiling your CSS to, and linking to it correctly. Usually you would have a separate folder called CSS. So in the next video, when we actually make changes to Bootstrap, right now we're just selectively using parts of it, but I'll show you how to actually override things, change the colors in the next video. So let's just call it simplified Bootstrap. So if I wanted to make an H1 with the class of display1, that should work. I'll just say display1 and save. Let's open with live server. And there we go. It looks like that works just fine. But if I tried to use a component that we haven't included, like what have we not done? A popover that requires JavaScript. What's something that doesn't require JavaScript? Okay, an alert, for example. We did not do any alerts. So if I tried to do, did we do an alert? I don't think so. No. So if I tried to do div.alert primary and save, nothing happens. We don't have that Bootstrap, but we do have display1. We do have, you know, what else? Tables, typography, and the other things that we included. And if I wanted to include alerts, I could do that by doing @import alerts, or is it alert? Let's double check. It is singular alert. Save. And you can see it just recompiled. And now we have an alert here, and it's working. So the way Koala works is automatically watching for changes. I told it to import alert. Now we'll have to see, do we have a container, for example? Like if I add a container in, is that included in what I compiled? It looks like the answer is no. So I think that's part of the grid, and we're missing the grid. This is where it gets a little tricky to figure out, you know, what comes from where. But if we want the grid, we can just add that in. So we do @import grid. Oh, need a semicolon. Save. And there we go. Now we have a container. Okay, so that's playing around with the source files, compiling them into our own version. Next, we're now going to override certain things, certain classes, change colors, different variables to customize it.